Hi, everyone. My name is Hope Forbes, and I'm a staff psychologist at the Counseling Center. Today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about how to help students manage COVID-related distress. So, as many of us have experienced, 2020 has been unpredictable, uncertain, and we've experienced losses in general. Loss of our routine, loss of the ways that we used to do things. Our students have not been exempt from this. And as our students return to campus, we may see that they are struggling with their distress that's related to COVID. So this conversation is going to be a little bit about typical reactions that students might be having at this point to COVID, and then how you can help students who are struggling navigate their struggles. Now, this presentation is closely associated with a presentation by Alex Lemisky. His talk will be more generally on how to help students in general. So how to identify general red flags, as well as what the foundational aspects of a conversation, a supportive conversation with students are. This presentation is very COVID specific. It looks at COVID-specific red flags, COVID-specific areas of distress, and ways to talk to students who are in distress. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so here's a list of 5 typical responses that we might see in students who are struggling with the outcome of COVID and with what's going on currently. So the first one is helplessness. People often experience helplessness when they don't have control over something important, or they don't have control over something they feel like they should have control over. Many of our students thought that this semester would look very different than the way it's shaping up to be. Some students have lost out on the opportunity to study abroad. Others have lost out on the opportunity to live with a bunch of friends on campus, perhaps because all of their friends are now living at home and taking classes remotely. So there has been this sense of a lack of control that students have been experiencing. There's also been some grief and loss that people have experienced. And as I mentioned briefly before, people have had losses that include the loss of their routine, the loss of what the typical Bentley fall semester looks like, the loss of study abroad. Other losses might be more internal. Students might be feeling a reduction in their self-esteem or a loss of their sense of purpose, whereas previously they knew exactly what they wanted to do and how they wanted to spend their life. Now that feels changed and they feel confused and uncertain now. Grief is a natural response to a loss. It tells us that the loss was important to us and that the loss was valuable. Uncertainty is the next big reaction. And uncertainty comes in where you no longer have certainty over things that you want certainty over. You want to know what's going to happen. And so for many people, this may be manifesting in not knowing what the fall semester will look like, not knowing what their health will look like in a couple of months. For our graduating seniors, this might be about how the pandemic will impact their job prospects. For our incoming first years, they might be wondering if their next however many semesters will look like this fall. Students might be also, as I mentioned, concerned about their health and concerned about their parents' health or their family members and friends' health. The pandemic has also had a lot of economic implications, and so students may be concerned about their parents' jobs and worried that, well, if a parent loses a job, am I still able to remain at Bentley and be a Bentley student? So many of them have questions about what is happening now and what will happen in the next couple of months. The fourth reaction is loneliness. So many people have been experiencing increased levels of loneliness and feelings of isolation. Some of this is due to the social distancing guidelines. Those have been made very clear about staying 6 feet away from each other, and about wearing masks and only really being close with the people that you live with. And so this has impacted for many how frequently we see friends, or how often we see all of our friends in a big group. The other piece of loneliness too is that this generation, the students, they are incredibly technologically savvy, and so they often interact with their peers on social media. However, interacting with peers on social media isn't connecting. And if you're feeling lonely, what they are ultimately looking for is a personal, meaningful connection with someone. The last reaction is something that I've termed home-based stressors. And this is the idea that college students are typically, but not always, in the age group of 18 to 25. And that is the developmental age that we call emerging adulthood. And it fits for college students. Many of them are trying to figure out their own identity, determine what they want to do with their lives, determine what their values are and how to enact those. And college and being away from home can be a great time and place to do that. However, when a student needs to go home unexpectedly for a long period of time and then quarantine with their family, there can be some tension there. And so we want to think about how we can help students remain feeling autonomous in the same way that they felt at school. Okay, so now that we've discussed a variety of reactions that students might be having, we'll want to think about, how do we know that a student is in distress? We'll want to look for red flags. And this is not a general list of red flags. This is a list of red flags that may be more pronounced over video, that might be more easily seen over video. So first, you'll want to notice, what do you see if you're meeting with a student? So does that student appear to be taking care of themselves or not? Do they look tired? Are they yawning? And do they look disheveled? Have they brushed their hair? Are they still in pajamas? Do they appear to be actively impaired by a substance? Have they been slurring their words and looking drowsy? Or on the other hand, do they seem incredibly animated and they're talking very quickly and loudly? Is their behavior appropriate for the situation? You'll also want to look at changes in behavior. And so this can include changes in attendance, changes in how engaged they appear to be in the class, their level of participation, and their performance in the class. They might go from an A in the beginning of the semester to a D at the current point in the semester. You can notice if they're frequently late to class and wonder about that. You'll also want to look behind them and see where they are, see what's behind them. You'll want to note if there are any kind of harmful substances around them, if there are pills strewn about, if there are empty beer cans or bottles of alcohol around. You'll want to take note of any weapons, if there are knives all over, or if there's a gun in the background. You'll also want to note if the environment is conducive to learning. Does it seem like the student is able to be engaged and attentive to class or in class? Or does it seem like there's a lot of background noise, whether it's a lot of people moving about, or possibly the student might be responsible for doing multiple things while they're taking the class, such as trying to take care of a sibling who might be taking classes remotely. You'll also want to note whether the student is visible or not. If the student's camera is always off, and you've talked to them about this and they've said, oh yes, I will turn my camera on, but they haven't, you might want to wonder why. And I would encourage you to ask the student. There are many possibilities. Perhaps the only private place that they have to work is in the bathroom and they feel embarrassed about that. Or perhaps they have been crying for the past week and they don't want to show their face because it is stained with tears. You'll also want to note if there are significant technology issues that are interfering with the student's ability to be fully present in class. And then finally, you'll want to make note of any types of concerning statements. So this includes things like wanting to die or wondering if people would care if you died. It also includes things such as self-harm, wanting to harm yourself, or wanting to harm others. So if a student displays any of these red flags, particularly the concerning statements or any kind of weapons or substances in the background, I would encourage you to try to start a conversation with the student. Now, as you start this conversation, there are a couple of things that you want to be thinking about in terms of how you respond to the student and how you can best support the student. So I'm going to go over three things: active listening, validation, and connection. So you may have heard of the active listening before. Active listening is a process where you reflect back to the student what you're hearing them say. And what this does is it not only shows that you're listening and that you want to make sure that you understand them, but it also allows them to give you more information about what's going on. It's sort of, you allow them to keep talking. When you're actively listening, you might be asking questions, and if so, the question should be directly related to what the student is saying. You might be empathizing with their feelings. You can also show active listening non-verbally. So you should be looking at the students with your eyes open. Your facial expression should mirror the student's facial expression. And then your body language should be open to them. So no arms crossed, no turning away, but looking at them and being open to what they have to say. The second piece of this is validation. Many students are under a lot of stress right now. And so when they share their feelings and their experiences with you, you may want to validate them. There is a caveat to this, which I'll explain in a minute, but for the most part, if they're feeling frustrated that they can't study abroad, or if they're feeling sad that they're not going to be living with their friends on campus, you can validate those feelings. Those feelings are important, and it's important to acknowledge them because they're real. Now, the caveat to validation is that you only want to validate something that is valid. So, for example, if a student comes to talk to you and they are angry because they failed a test and they're blaming the professor, you can validate that, yes, it is frustrating to fail a test, especially when, if the student has studied. However, it's not the professor's fault, so you don't want to validate that part. The final component of this is a connection. If a student is talking to you, that means there is some level of comfort with you and that they trust you to some extent. And they are looking to connect with you. They're looking to share more about their internal world with you. And so it's really important for you to be aware of that and really fully interested in them and engaged in the conversation. Show them that you want to make that connection also and that you want to help them out. For a student, knowing that you are on their side can be incredibly helpful. Now, before we go back to those typical reactions and talk about those a little more, when you have these conversations with students, one thing you'll want to think about is self-care. And self-care is vital for all of us. Self-care can be physical and emotional. And so you'll want to see if a student is taking care of themselves. So for physical self-care, you'll want to know if a student is getting enough sleep, eating sufficiently, exercising. A student might come in to you in a lot of distress, feeling very upset about something. And when you ask them about their sleep, they might tell you they haven't slept in 36 hours. Sometimes the best intervention can be encouraging them to go back to their room to get some sleep, and then you can meet with them the next day. Similarly, you'll want to know if they're taking care of themselves emotionally. And so what this might look like is if they are in a bad mood, if they are feeling down and distressed, you may want to talk to them about how they can return to their emotional baseline and feel a little bit more in control. So what do they need to do for themselves to take care of themselves emotionally? And that can be different for everyone. For some people, it can be taking a long shower. For others, it could be dancing in their rooms. And for others, it can just be calling a good friend or a parent to talk. But that's something that'll be specific to them. Okay, so now we're going back to those 5 typical reactions. So I'm going to share a little bit more about these reactions with you, and then talk to you a little bit about how you can have a conversation with a student who's struggling in this area, and help them navigate this a little bit more effectively. Okay, so we're going to be talking about helplessness first. And our students may be feeling quite a bit of helplessness. Feelings of helplessness come when people don't have control over certain things. These could be certain things that they feel are important to them, or certain things that they previously had control over. And now they've lost that control. This can be scary. And for students, when they start to feel helpless, what they're doing is they're actually exaggerating that lack of control, that loss of control. And they're starting to think that they don't have control in a lot of different areas of their lives. And that can be pretty scary for students. So they might start to feel helpless if they feel like they don't have any control over their lives. So when you're talking with a student about this, validation is important. You want to validate their sense that, yes, they don't have control over important things in their lives now. And that's really hard and scary and frustrating. You can absolutely validate that. And at the same time, you'll want to think with them about where they might have some control. Because when you start to think with them about where they have some control, you can start to interfere with that more global sense of helplessness. And it serves as a nice reminder that even though there are areas where they don't have control, there also are areas where they do have control. So when you talk with them, you may want to think about, first of all, what do you have control over? Well, they have control over their sleeping, eating, class schedule, socializing with friends on the weekends. They do have control over certain decisions. Now, let's say last year, their favorite activity was to take 20 friends, go into Boston, eat at a restaurant inside, very close to each other. That is unlikely to happen. And so a student might be upset that they can't do that right now. And that's understandable. However, not liking your options about what you can do over the weekend is not the same as not having control over what you do. They can still make a decision about what they do. They do have some control. Another thing that you might want to think with them about is, what is a goal that they have for the semester? Perhaps they have a goal of completing, let's say, applying for an internship and getting an internship, getting an A or multiple A's in different classes, staying in touch with their friends from home. So once they've identified a goal, you can think with them about what they can do now, today, sometime today, to take a step towards that goal. It can even be something that they can do in their meeting with you. So for example, if their goal is to get an internship, they can maybe send an email to Career Services, trying to figure out a time where they can meet with Career Services. They can text some friends to talk to them if those friends had done an internship over the summer at a similar company. Or they can, open up their resume and start refining it. All of those actions remind a student that there are things that they have control over. And even though there are areas that they've lost control in, they can still achieve their goals. Okay, so the second reaction is grief and loss. So as I mentioned earlier, most people have experienced losses. And some of these losses are losses in routines, the loss of expectations of what the semester will look like, the loss of certain experience. Students may also be experiencing the loss of people in their lives, a family member or a close friend. Other losses might be more internal, such as a reduction in self-esteem or not being so sure of your purpose anymore. And the typical response to a loss, to an important loss, is grief. Grief tells us that the loss was valuable and important to us. And so grief can be displayed in any number of ways. When someone is grieving, they might at different times be angry, sad, frustrated, feel guilty or ashamed, feel worried, shocked, or even possibly some relief. All of that is normal. And just as an aside, the Counseling Center has also done a presentation on grief and COVID. That was also given by Alex Lemisky. And and I would encourage you, if you are interested in the stages of grief and in learning more about how to help students cope with grief, I would encourage you to watch that. Okay. So when a student is coming in grieving, the idea is that you want to let them express their feelings, express what's on their mind. Because ultimately, allowing them to express how they're doing is a step on the path towards acceptance. And so when they come in, it's important that you give them the space to discuss their loss. Let them direct the conversation. This is where your active listening skills come in. Reflect back what you're hearing, empathize with them, validate them. Now, sometimes it can be hard to have a conversation where a student is in a lot of distress. You might feel an urge to try to make them feel better. I understand that urge. And at the same time, I would encourage you not to act on that urge. The student, by sharing their painful emotions, is looking for someone to hear them out, looking for someone to understand them and support them as they experience these painful emotions. And so the more that you can actively listen to them and be there as a support, the easier it will be for the student to share with you. Now, so if a student has experienced a loss, you can ask them questions about that loss. So let's say if the student has lost a person, there are certain things you might want to be thinking about with them. Who was that person in their life? What role did that person play? What are their memories of that person, their favorite memories? Or what activities would they do with that person? You can also see if there's someone else who is struggling with that same loss. So for example, let's say the student comes in because they lost a grandparent. You can see if you can ask them if one of their siblings is also struggling with this loss, or maybe their cousin is struggling with the loss. Encouraging them to connect with that person can be incredibly helpful for them. Now, let's say the student has lost an experience. You can ask them a little bit about what they were hoping for by having the experience. So let's say a student had planned to live in the dorms with their best friends, but that's not happening now. What had they been hoping for? Had they been hoping to make new friends, or perhaps deepen their current friendships, or maybe just find some people that they could get pizza with at 1 a.m? What do they feel like they're missing the most from this experience? You can also ask them if they have had similar experiences in the past. So for example, let's say the student that you're speaking with is a sophomore, and maybe they had an amazing time living in the dorms during their first year. You can ask them about that. What were their favorite experiences and favorite memories of living in the dorms? Finally, you can also encourage them to connect with other people who are also going through their same experience. So if this student is living at home but really doesn't really want to be, you can think with them about, do they have any peers who are in that same situation? And encourage them to connect with their peers over that common theme. And they can talk with their peers about what it's like to live at home, you know, the things that they don't like, the things that are easier at home, the weirdest things that their parents do, and what they hope to do, what they can't wait to do when they finally get back to campus and to living in the dorms. Now, I want to end this part by just saying that when you talk to a student about their loss, they might be crying, they might be sad, they might be expressing painful emotions. You are not, causing these emotions. You are just giving them the space to express the emotions that they are having. Okay, so this next reaction is certainty. There has been significant uncertainty in most of our lives since March. Laws and regulations are changing. Public health guidance continues to be refined. And our experience at Bentley and what's going to these past several months and this fall semester will continue to change. Their experience of uncertainty is absolutely valid. There are a lot of things that are uncertain. However, sometimes students will start to exaggerate the areas in their lives that are uncertain, and they may become overwhelmed with this sense of uncertainty. That creates significant anxiety and potentially some panic for students, and they can easily sort of spiral into their anxiety. So when you're talking to students about this, you'll want to validate that yes, there is uncertainty. Not only is life in general uncertain, but this period of time is very uncertain. And we can actually anticipate that things will be changing, possibly every day. So you'll want to validate that sense of uncertainty. You'll also want to recognize with them that their minds might be jumping into the future a little bit. They might be trying to make predictions about things. So if a student is concerned about getting COVID, let's say, and they're talking to you about this and they're worrying about the what ifs, one thing that you might want to notice for them is that their minds are jumping into the future and they're predicting the future, and then they're worrying about those predictions. Not only is that unhelpful, it actually makes them feel worse. They're trying to figure out action plans for 50 different possibilities, and we have no idea what's going to happen. And that just heightens their anxiety, really. So you'll want to notice that for students, that students are jumping into the future in unhelpful ways. Now, you'll want to suggest that students come back to the present moment, to today, and think about what is certain now. How can they plan for today? And so if their uncertainty is really revolving around the possibility of getting COVID, you can think with them about, well, what can you do today that can reduce your likelihood of getting COVID? Well, perhaps they could pack an extra mask in their bag in case the mask that they wear to class gets dirty. Perhaps they could make sure that they are always 6 feet apart from people. Perhaps they can make sure that when they see their friends, they are abiding by all social distancing guidelines. So if you're thinking about things that they can do, that they can implement for themselves, that reminds them that they do have some kind of choice and that they can manage this a little bit. Now, the other piece that you might want to think with them about is identifying their worst case scenario. So in this case, for this student, it might be getting COVID. Now, often when students think about their worst case scenario, they sort of spiral into anxiety and into the what ifs about if it might happen. However, what can actually be helpful for students would be to identify what that worst case scenario is, and then think a little bit about how they would manage it. So you can talk to students about, so what if you did get COVID? What would you do? And so you might think with the students about, well, where would they isolate? Would they remain on Bentley's campus, or would their parents come pick them up and would they go home? What important things would they bring with them? What would they want to keep with them for 2 weeks? So the more that you can talk about decisions that they might make if the worst case scenario occurred, the more that you're reminding them that even if something unpredictable or scary happens, they can manage it. And for a student, or for anyone really, knowing that they can manage uncertainty actually provides a lot of relief, and you begin to feel like your life has more certainty in it. So the fourth reaction is loneliness. And so as I mentioned, people are experiencing increased loneliness and increased feelings of isolation. And this is partially due to those social distancing guidelines, and partially due to the fact that students tend to rely on social media and social media platforms. And those don't provide for that connection that we really need as humans. As humans, we need a personal, meaningful connection with people in order to satisfy that need to belong. And so social media does not typically provide that for students, but students tend to rely on social media, which is problematic. And it's likely that now they're relying on social media even more, given these social distancing guidelines. So if a student is feeling lonely, there are a couple of things that you might want to think with them about. First of all, you might want to think with them about ways to connect with other students. So maybe they have previously connected with people in person at big parties or over social media. The big parties really is not much of an option. So you might want to think with them about, well, given the social distancing guidelines, how can they interact with their peers and see their peers? They can go on socially distanced outings. Perhaps they could go on a socially distanced hike, or walk, or spend time together, grab takeout from a restaurant and eat, picnic style, 6 feet apart. But thinking with them about how they can have in-person interactions that are still safe would be really important. You can also think with them about different groups that they can join, different Bentley clubs. Some students may actually find it easier with clubs over Zoom. They might feel like it allows them to jump into a couple of different groups, check each one out, see what they think about each one, and then when they feel like one fits their values and they're interested in one, then they can really commit to that one. And also to try to connect with the people in that group over that shared interest. So for example, if it's a finance group, trying to connect with them over finance can be helpful. It can also be helpful if you ask the student to identify one person that's important to them. One person that they're not currently connected with at this point in time, but someone that in the past they were connected to. Maybe it could be a friend from their first year at Bentley. Perhaps it could be someone from high school, a teacher or a coach, but someone in their lives that is important to them. Encourage that student to reach out to that person. Try to set up a socially distanced outing or meeting with that person, or see if they can do a FaceTime chat. But trying to find someone with whom the student was previously connected with, because we know that that person is meaningful to the student. we know that there is a pre-existing relationship there. And so it will be easier for the student to feel that personal connection with that person. And then finally, if a student is talking to you about feeling lonely, they're feeling like they don't have many people in their lives that they really connect with. And at the same time, they've connected with you around this. So I would strongly encourage you that before you end the meeting with the student, to schedule a time to check in with the student the following week, just to sort of see how they're doing. This sends the message that you care about the student. You care about how the student's doing and that you really want to support the student. Okay, so the final reaction, this final area is something that I've termed home-based stressors. And so these might occur when a student who has been at school 2-3 years in college and is now has to go home and spend significant time just quarantining with their family. The student has likely changed to some extent while away at school. However, family members and family dynamics likely haven't changed. And so you might see that the student is experiencing some tension there. They might want to be more independent than their parents want them to be, or they might fall into dynamics where they become reliant on their parents. So with this, what we want to think about is how can we help students continue to be independent and self-sufficient while living in their parents' house and abiding by their parents' rules. So the theme here is autonomy, being self-sufficient. There are a couple of things that you can think with students about. The first is self-care. And I know that we talked about self-care earlier. This is a slight twist on self-care. So are they taking responsibility to take care of themselves? And so by that I mean, let's say the student is sleeping from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And they feel rested and their sleep sounds great. But as you talk to the student, you realize, oh, they only go to sleep at 10 p.m. because their parents cut off the Wi-Fi then, and there's nothing else for them to do. They only wake up at 7 a.m. because their parents are just so loud when they are trying to get ready for work, and the student can't fall back to sleep, so they're up for the day at 7 a.m. Perhaps the student is eating 3 meals a day, but you find out that they're only eating those 3 meals, and those meals are well balanced, but you find out that they're only eating them because there's pre-made food in the fridge. And if there's no pre-made food, then the student just eats chips all day. Perhaps the student is struggling with a class or some peers. Is the student trying to rely on their parent to help navigate that, or are they taking responsibility to navigate it? Perhaps they're using their parent as a resource, but are they the one who is determining how to navigate it, or are their parents stepping in? The second thing that you'll want to be thinking about is the student able to complete their own responsibilities of being a student? So this includes things such as attending class, participating in group projects, completing exams, doing extracurriculars. And if it seems like the answer is no, you'll want to think with the student about, well, what are the barriers to doing this? So a barrier could be that there's no privacy at home, or a barrier could be that their parents expect that they take care of a younger sibling who is also doing some remote learning. Once you've identified the barriers, you can try to problem solve with the student. Well, if there's no privacy at home, could the student walk to the library and spend a couple of hours a day at the library doing work? If the issue is that there's a younger sibling at home doing remote learning, the student can communicate with their parents, perhaps try to come up with some kind of schedule that feels more doable. The final area is you'll want to know if they feel like they have sufficient autonomy. Do they feel like they can make their decisions? Do they feel like they have total control over their decisions? and they may say no. So for example, a student living at Bentley, in the dorms, no curfew, they decide when they go to sleep on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday night. But at home, their parents might have a curfew. And that's something that if they're living at home, they likely need to abide by. So this can create some distress for students. Sometimes students will get very upset and they'll become sort of overwhelmed with this feeling like they don't have autonomy. They will start to see things, they may start to see things as, well, when I'm at school, I can make my own decisions, but when I'm at home, I can't. And that's not the case. So you may want to think with students about, where do they have autonomy? Where do they have some choice? They can choose things like their sleeping and eating schedules, what their weekends look like, how and when they socialize with friends. Now, you'll also want to identify areas where they're hoping for more autonomy. Let's say a student is stuck in the house much of the time, and they just want to get out. They just want to use their parents' car and, leave and just drive somewhere for a couple of hours. The first thing you'll want to think about, is this a possibility? So you and the student can brainstorm ideas to discuss with the student's parents. So the student might talk to their parents and suggest that maybe the student can drive a parent to work and then pick them up, and then would have access to the car all day. Or maybe a student can talk to their parents about scheduling one day a weekend to use the car. In some families, this might work really well. In other families, the parents might say no. They might say, no, it's my car. I bought it and I want it available to me when I want it. And if that's the case, you'll want to think about, what are other ways that the student can meet this need? If they are hoping to get out of the house and just get some space, can they get a ride from a friend into town? Can they take a long walk around their neighborhood? Can they Uber somewhere? But thinking with them about ways to make their own decisions can help enhance their sense of autonomy, even though they're living at home. Okay, so I want to make sure that you know that you are not alone in trying to support students. We have a lot of different departments on campus that help to support students. We've got the Residential Center, the Center for International Students and Scholars, the Multicultural Center, Spiritual Life, the Health Center, Academic Support Services. If you're meeting with a student and you think that they could benefit from any of these areas, I would strongly encourage you to remind the student about them, and maybe even make a phone call with the student to that department. Now, if you continue to be concerned about a student, you can always give us a call. We are happy to speak with you, to give you our recommendations on how to support students, and to let you know if we think that they need to come in. We also encourage you to talk to them about who we are. So at the Counseling Center, we provide short-term therapy for students. So we'll meet with all eligible students for a consultation, and then based on that consultation, we'll give the student recommendations, whether we think they might benefit from just a check-in meeting, whether they might benefit from short-term therapy, or whether they might benefit from a longer-term therapy, and we might want to think about, should they meet with someone off campus. Our services are included in the cost of tuition, and our services are confidential, so these are not a part of the university record, and we actually need a student's explicit written approval to provide anyone with information. You can also suggest that they look at our website. We've got a YouTube channel where we have lots of information on skills that they can use to manage distress. You can encourage them to look at our clinician profiles. Sometimes students find that to be an easier way to think about meeting with someone, feeling like they can know the person they're meeting with. And then finally, in any kind of crisis, please call us. Our number is 781-891-2274. We will, if there's a crisis, we will meet with the students same day. And if you are concerned after hours, we do have an after hours clinician on call. You'll want to call our counseling center, that same number, and you can be, if you press a certain button, you will be routed to the on-call clinician. Now, I just wanted to add this in because we are talking a lot about helping students. And this, I think, is a nice reminder that we sometimes need support as well. As there's a saying that goes something like, the car can't drive without gas. We need to be filling up our own tanks in order for us to be able to support students. So we've got this employee assistance program. You can find out more information about it on Bentley's website. There is a phone number on the screen. And if you're experiencing stressors, whether COVID related or not, I would encourage you to reach out to them. And then finally, I just wanted to say thank you. We at the Counseling Center really appreciate all of the support that you give to students. And we recognize how much time and effort you put in. So thank you.